Okay, so let's see, is my audio live? Okay, so this is looking good so far. Okay, so let's switch to this then, and we should be pretty much ready to go. So yes, I guess welcome everyone to the latest stream here. I haven't done one in a while. I think it's been nearly like a month since the last stream. Just a combination of, I suppose, not having a topic necessarily the last few weeks to do a stream for, and then just sort of other stuff happening. But I suppose we had some pretty major news this week that is going to be, again, I suppose, major news in the coming weeks. And it's quite a substantial piece of content. So let's take some time to go through the Avatar Legends role-playing game Quickstart guide. A few other things I suppose to cover first in terms of, before we get straight into like looking through this and going over what we expect the game to be like. There's a few other stuff that came up sort of in relation to this. The first of which would just be this little bit of interesting information, which is that Avatar News, who is a pretty good source for news on Avatar, asked them about, what's with the logo. Is that something you guys came up with on your own, or does it come from Avatar Studios? And Magpie Games, you can see here, answers them and says, the Avatar Legends logo and brand were given to us by Avatar Studios. We're excited to see what else they publish under the name. So this sort of then led me on to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, which is that Avatar Legends is a trademark that Nickelodeon Viacom filed a few months ago, back in like May. It's interesting because this is also when they trademarked Braving the Elements, the podcast name, and they also trademarked Avatar Legends at basically the same time. Now, if you look through this article, and you can find this if you just go up to look up stuff on like just the trademark itself, but they've compiled it here on Nick Alive. Avatar Legends is meant to be this trademark for Avatar to be used on one, clothing, footwear, headgear. You can see basically all this sort of clothing is, I guess we're going to be getting a lot of Avatar clothing officially under the Avatar Legends brand. Leather stuff in terms of umbrellas, luggage tags, tote bags, backpacks. Now, this doesn't necessarily confirm we are getting Avatar versions of all of this stuff, but it means that they have the trademark to use on stuff like this. Games, toys, sports equipment, that is, I suppose, what this would be under. It means they can put out action figures under this as well. That is what this game would be under, Avatar Legends, the role-playing game, as you can see here. Card games, so it means that if we do get like an official card game, it'll probably be Avatar Legends card game, which is kind of cool. Paper, cardboard, and goods, stuff like this. So this is, I suppose, your diaries and stuff like this, lunch boxes, and so on. So this is really, really cool to see that, like, this is obviously officially from Viacom. They have trademarked this specific thing. And obviously they're working with Magpie Games to make a very, very official Avatar role-playing game. And it's the first thing that we've heard about under the Avatar Legends title. I know there was some discussion about like, is Avatar Legends, should this now be sort of the way we refer to the franchise? Because we've always had that issue about, we all as fans refer to it as the Avatar franchise, but it can't really officially be the Avatar franchise because of Blue People Avatar, and I suppose the word Avatar isn't necessarily, is an actual word, so, it has to be a little bit more than that. But Avatar is also more than just ATLA and Legend of Korra, and we've seen that a lot with like the pops and stuff like that. The merchandise has always been, this is an Avatar piece of merchandise or it's a Korra piece of merchandise. So we've been lacking a little bit a just general franchise title as such. So Avatar Legends, it would seems to be that whenever they want to use it, in the sense that the Kyoshi novels probably should have been Avatar Legends, The Rise and Shadow of Kyoshi, rather than ATLA, Shadow of Kyoshi. So, and then the other interesting thing here is, electronic apparatus and stuff like this. Like, includes video games, computer games, audiobooks, music, computer software, stuff for mobile phones and so on. So, does this necessarily confirm directly right now all this stuff is happening? Not necessarily, but look how heavy Avatar has been on the merchandising front, and already things are quite intense at the moment with McFarlane and what they're doing. We have a bunch of other toy lines as well, and then this seems to suggest that more, I suppose, officially themselves, they're going to be getting into doing a little bit more merchandise. That's pretty good in my book, that we could see a lot more, I suppose, stuff officially from Nick Viacom, rather than just this site has t-shirts that happen to be licensed and stuff like that. So I think this is a good sign going forward, and the fact that more recently Magpie Games are convinced we'll see this branding going forward. Because again, you'll note, Avatar Legends, I get why the question was asked, because it's like, okay, Avatar logo, but then Legends in the same kind of thing, and then you can see the little trademark kind of symbol just there. Quite interesting. Final thing before we start is just that if you want to get your own hands on the Quick Start guide, you can just sign up on the website. If you just go to Magpie Games and go to their Avatar page, it looks like this, and all you have to do is enter your email down here and you can get your copy today. So there's that. And yeah, the Kickstarter is launching August 3rd, 2021 at 10 a.m. Eastern. So that's kind of cool. The Kickstarter page, they have sort of a upcoming page up for it. So you can if you have an account already, you can say like notify me on launch, and you can see here already 150 people have followed this for when it goes live. So that's actually going to be pretty exciting, because if we just take a look at some of the other stuff that Magpie Games have on Kickstarter at the moment, the most recent one I think is this. It's the Root tabletop role-playing game, and we see that this got 6,495 backers for a total of $602,022. So that's sort of what Avatar has to beat, and it's already telling that they're pretty confident in it, in that they are treating the Kickstarter launch as basically just a way to do pre-orders. So all goals, I assume, will be met. I assume most of the stretch goals will be met as well. And it will be interesting to see what exactly they do for it when it goes live. Because this Root game is the same system, I think, powered by the Apocalypse. So they'll do, I assume, their campaign for Avatar similarly to the way that they did this. So expect the tiers to be, like 20 for PDFs if you just want the digital version. 40 gets you the physical book of the game. 75 or more gets you the main book and then the follow-up book. So I suppose for Avatar that's going to be the Republic City book as well as the Spirit World book, and then this $100 or more gets you all that stuff, the PDFs and the sort of extra stretch goal stuff, which includes equipment deck, dice, maps that you can draw on, and there's like special edition stuff as well at higher tiers. I think they have some visuals. I looked at this last night to prepare for this. So you can see they're going to put a lot of information into the stream when it comes out, and that we're going to have a core Avatar book. Then there's going to be expansion books for, like I said, Republic City and the Spirit World. That's what they've said already. I'm guessing Avatar will do well enough that they might do some sort of a special edition thing like this, where the books and they'll come in a bit of a box. So that's going to be something to look out for. To see how successful or not it is. And then I'm guessing we'll get something similar to this with Avatar, just extra stuff, physical items to help you play the game in terms of like dice and deck with like equipment and I suppose moves and stuff like that. So it's all shaping up to be pretty cool. I'm actually excited to see the Kickstarter go live, just to see how successful it is, because like I said earlier, we have 6,500 and then 600,000 money overall to beat. I have a feeling Avatar is so popular, this will do that. But how successful it will be very telling, just to judge how big the franchise is, because people who are into these games are going to buy this for sure. But then also people who are just Avatar fans who aren't necessarily super into the games are going to get this because it's kind of a detailed book that's going to have, I suppose, a little bit of extra information in it. So yeah, that sounds pretty cool overall. And so yeah, in the chat there, there'll be exclusive game content for Kickstarter backers, and there will be Kickstarter exclusive playbooks. Okay, that's kind of cool. So yeah, it means that there is a pretty big incentive, I suppose, to get the game with the Kickstarter, so that you get like everything, including the sort of like basically pre-order bonuses for the game. So there's that. And then I think the final thing in terms of like a little bit of news is just that, like, I'll probably mention this in my next news video I'll do next week, but this is just a weird thing that, like, Free Comic Book Day on Twitter mentioned. We've been talking to our friends at Dark Horse Comics, and they might have an Avatar The Last Airbender cover reveal coming soon. Now, obviously, they have to be referring to the Free Comic Book Day book, which is one of the only books that doesn't have any information about it. But this was like 5 days ago, and there's still no sign of anything about this. So I'm guessing this is just next week. So I'm guessing next Tuesday, like a week on from this. So this was July 12th. So on the 19th, I'm guessing, perhaps, there might be the reveal for the Avatar cover. It's really baffling. Like, it's under a month until the release of this Free Comic Book Day book in August. I think it's August 14th. We'll see what happens. Because yeah, Comic-Con is next week, and while I don't think we expect anything major Avatar related, I think a lot of little things might end up happening, like extra merchandise reveals, like Diamond Select might announce some of their new stuff. McFarlane might announce the other products that we pretty much know about already, but like the bigger scale line, the statue that they're going to be doing, that sort of stuff. And we'll see what else goes on as well. But we'll jump in here finally to this Avatar Legends, the role-playing game. Again, go to the website, put in your email address, subscribe to the newsletter, and you can get this quick start guide for free. There's a few more steps than that, in that you have to go to this website, sign up, and get it. But you know, it's easy enough. But again, visually, I think it's quite nice because, you know, they use sort of stock art. There doesn't seem to be really any new art in it apart from like diagram stuff, but it's still nicely done overall. And again, it's like version 1.0 before the content is actually properly out. So there's like 55 pages here. I'm not going to read through every single word in the guide, but on specific sections we will take more of a deep dive into what's going on here, because it is quite detailed overall. But I think there's a weird thing here where, surprisingly, they leave out some rather basic information, in that if you look through this whole guide, they never once directly tell you that, oh yeah, when you roll 2 6-sided dice. There's like one mention in the entire book where they mention the idea of 2d6s. Other than that, it's all general. Roll dice, and based on your score, this happens. They never once make it clear that, oh yeah, everyone playing should probably have at least 2 dice with them. Normal dice. That was one of the weirdest things reading through this, was that, you know, they have all of this basically beginner's guide to doing RPG games, and they forget to actually just mention one of the more interesting aspects, rolling the dice. So we'll go through it anyway. So, yeah, this is just the basics for this. Avatar Legends, it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And yeah, there's a pre-generated characters and an adventure for you to do here to use the game to start off with straight away. The credits is kind of interesting in the sense that, like, okay, design, writing, editing, layout, art direction, proofing. The writing is probably the more interesting thing here, because to me, there's at least one new piece of information that sort of is quote-unquote canon, and that is that they reveal either a location within the Fire Nation capital with a name that we've never heard about before, but the way they phrase it, it seems like it's just another name for the capital. So it's not just this made up thing, but it's like, no, they got this information. But there's no real mention of like this writer or this person at Nickelodeon helped us come up with this. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. So there's that. But anyway, the next page is interesting in that they basically give you full-on flavor backstory for the sample kind of campaign here. It's kind of cool. It's obviously Dragonbone Catacombs here. A crackling rainbow of sparks erupted into a dragon-shaped swarm, clawing across the sky above the awestruck crowd, marking the start of the week-long coronation celebration in honor of Fire Lord Ozai. The feasts, the spectacles, the parades, everything about today's festivities surpassed the crowd's wildest expectations. And we see like 3 attendees were missing. They stumbled their way down the palace stairs. And it's just meant to set up the idea that, this sample mission is the group going into the Dragonbone Catacombs to try and steal a Fire Nation scroll. And they get captured, and that is basically where the player game actually starts. So kind of cool. Obviously, I suppose there's going to be a bunch of set stories like this in the final product, but that they're only going to be suggestions, and that most of it will be sort of, come up with the stories yourself. But yeah, kind of cool. We'll get into those characters a bit later on in the book. So the world of Avatar Legends here. So they have to obviously make this open for people who are new to RPG games as well as who are new to Avatar. So, the flavor for Avatar is important to get across here. And in the final book, I'm very interested to see just how much like detail and sort of terminology there is, and if there's anything kind of new that really hasn't been previously established. Heroic fantasy game set in the world of Avatar and Korra. You play a hero from one of the 4 nations, force of change in the world. Stories of adventure, personal journeys, makes sense. The Avatar. There's not much mention of the Avatar from what I saw throughout this, in that they seem to be kind of specific that the characters that you play only can be like one bender. Obviously, that's a rule where you're either the Avatar or you can bend one element. But I'm wondering, will there be special rules in the final book about if you did want to do a campaign that features one of the player characters being the Avatar, or if you want one of the NPC characters to be the Avatar, how you actually go about doing that. I hope there's something. It would be a bit weird to not have that, but anyway. Many looking for guidance. The Avatar is not the only hero in this world, so you can already tell they seem to be sort of moving away from, don't focus everything on the Avatar, but people are going to want to use the Avatar, of course. So here's again flavor text section. The 4 nations. Okay, so how do they go about doing this? The Fire Nation Homeland is located on a series of volcanic islands to the west. Fire Nation citizens are tenacious, inventive people who embrace industriousness and progress. During the 100-Year War, the Fire Nation government and military caused the genocide of the Air Nomads and invaded the Earth Kingdom and Water Tribes. After the defeat of Fire Lord Ozai by Avatar Aang, the Fire Nation and its people have worked to redefine themselves away from the terrible crimes of their past without losing their traditions, heritage, and thirst for innovation. That's a pretty nice explanation of the Fire Nation. So that's no real problem there in terms of just everyone knows that from ATLA. And if you've read the comics, you get the direction Zuko's trying to take the Fire Nation in post-war. So just reading some of the chat here. Okay. The Water Tribes are primarily split between the North and South Poles, with a small group of Water Tribe members known as the Foggy Swamp Tribe located to the southwest of the Earth Kingdom. The tribes once lived in harmony, but after a series of devastating naval defeats during the 100-Year War, the Northern Tribe retreated behind an icy wall, while the Fire Nation hunted down and wiped out many of the southern waterbenders. Living in the harsh conditions of the poles and the swamp has made the people of the water tribes resilient to hardship and respectful of the world around them. During the 100-Year War, both northern and southern water tribes suffered greatly, but since the end of the war, they both substantially rebuilt and recovered, albeit with the northern and southern tribes each taking very different paths into the future. Okay, once lived in harmony. They don't really go into like the history of the tribes here, which is, I suppose, fine. The eras that they're covering don't go far enough back to cover, you know, telling the story of how the South formed itself from the North and stuff like that. But you know, that's that. The Earth Kingdom is the largest nation geographically and traditionally one of the most stable. During the 100-Year War, however, the Earth Kingdom was occupied and colonized by the Fire Nation, losing even the great walled city of Ba Sing Se. After the war, the Earth Kingdom recovered much of its land from the Fire Nation, but saw its people forever changed by colonization, especially in the Huzin provinces and other places where the Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom citizens lived side by side and formed their own unique traditions. It's interesting, like obviously the Huzin provinces is like what they mention as being sort of one of it's a Zoolon's, I think, the great things like he accomplished. Obviously, I think probably the better reference is the whole like Yudao stuff from the comics, but you know that's basically what they're referencing here. It covers such a large area. It's home to a number of culturally diverse peoples who have their own set of local laws and traditions. The people of the Earth Kingdom are thus widely diverse, but the nation struggles with xenophobia nonetheless and never backs down from a conflict that can be grounded in national pride. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, they cover the eras up next. Yeah. So there's that. Okay. So finally, the air nomads are a monastic people who wander the globe with no true home aside from the 4 air temples located on the mountains across the world. At the beginning of the 100-Year War, the air nomads suffered a mass genocide and only began to recover much later during Avatar Aang's era, when a group known as the Air Acolytes continued their traditions, eventually forming a new incarnation of the Air Nation. After an event known as Harmonic Convergence in Avatar Korra's era, airbending abilities saw a massive resurgence, developing in seemingly random people throughout the other nations and allowing the Air Nation itself to recover further. In the past, Air Nomads were known as a peaceful, egalitarian people who embraced a life of simplicity and environmental preservation. The new Air Nation adheres to many of the same values, but with a drive to act and be part of the world. So there we go. Depending on the era you play, each nation acts as a backdrop, focusing on different conflict with some consistent themes. During the 100-Year War era, the Fire Nation is focused on colonization and technological advancement. By contrast, in Aang's era, after the defeat of Ozai, the Fire Nation is focused on establishing new cultural and social reforms and healing from a century of relentless war. And yeah, just getting across that the dynamic is still roughly the same. It does make it interesting, though, if you choose to play in the 100-Year War era, how you go about, I suppose, playing something like an airbender character, which you could still play as someone who survived the Air Nomad, but we don't have enough context for necessarily a lot of that information. So again, this is just like an initial kind of version of this. The actual book, I suppose, is going to be like 200 plus pages. So I assume there'll be more like basic lore in the final book to give you more context for what's going on here. But yeah, let's go through the eras here. So this is kind of interesting. The eras are each tied to the span of an Avatar's life, except for the 100-Year War era. So Kyoshi's era covers the events after the Shadow of Kyoshi novel. Playing Kyoshi's era if you want to fight in battles against rogues and bandits and deal with corruption as the nations defend and reinforce their borders. So this is probably the biggest question I have, especially for people who maybe haven't read all the books and stuff like that. Like, do they just expect you to tell a story in Kyoshi's era without any like specific details and stuff like that? Like, is it going to have like a list of Daofei groups that you can use? Or how is this going to work? There's stuff like that where it's like, how do you have enough context to create a like fully fleshed out new story if they don't give you sort of prompts about the kind of era and so on, because Kyoshi's era would be very defined by Dao Fei basically. So are they going to go into that a little bit more? That's kind of what I want to know. Roku's era covers the time just before the arrival of the comet and the beginning of the war. If you want to deal with tensions between the different nations and the trials of maintaining an uneasy peace. Okay, that's interesting. I suppose trying to make these ones distinct is kind of interesting. I mean, that like bandits is the main thing here. This one, not much. 100-Year War era, just before Aang's awakening. Rebel against unjust rule, protect the weak, stand up to tyranny. Fair enough. The Aang's era is interesting in that they specifically mention it's set after imbalance. If you want to heal the world after tragedy and help push it into a brighter future. So, all this is nice to see. Mentioning a lot of the very recent content is really good to hear about. Korra's era is set after Ruins of the Empire, so that's interesting. Repercussions of imperialism playing a modern era. The adventure is set in the 100-Year War era, of course, but you can choose any of the other ones. The players each create a hero using a playbook, which is an archetype of a character. They're covered right towards the end of the guide. The GM, Game Master, of course. New to RPGs here. Yeah, so that's just getting across, like, if you have no clue how a Dungeons and Dragons or game like this actually works, they have a basic kind of, this is what you're trying to do here. You're basically trying to tell an episode of a show using characters that you play yourselves as the characters and so on. So you can see here, some stock images of the fire ferrets here. Starting play, getting started. So, this is information that I like in terms of just going over, like at the start, how big of a story do you want it to be in terms of scope? So the scope is like, it could all be set in one building if you wanted it to be. You could have it set across just a couple of buildings with, I suppose, you more or less skipping a lot of the travel between them. You could have it set in a big location, or everywhere the seas touch, so the entire world if you want to go like really, really big with the story. But I like this. It gets across, this is how you go about creating a story on your own. That if you're really unfamiliar with it and that like they give you all the prompts that you need. If like the group at the start has to decide on, okay, what's this story actually that we're going to be telling going to be about? Are we trying to defeat a villain, protect a place, change something in the world, deliver something, rescue something, learn something, and cover some of the ideas and so on. I should probably actually scroll down to this. Yeah, so the campaign creation worksheet is what you do when you're making an era, deciding on what your story is. So obviously you choose your era, Kyoshi, Roku, 100-Year War era, Aang, or Korra. Your scope, obviously from before, is basically, how big are you going with this? What are what are you trying to do here? And then what are the sort of, I suppose, more story kind of connections between characters and so on? What are the inciting incidents of the story? Locations, acts, so that you have a rough skeleton structure to go through the story. So you're not like making every single aspect of it up on the fly. Allies and enemies, and then we'll get into some of the other stuff a little later on. So I do like that, the way it's organized. So there's that. Yeah, scope, group focus, outlining incident. So we befriended an ally who gives us access to this thing. We discovered a secret hidden by X person. So that's a kind of cool thing of just like, yeah, that's how it's going to work, and so on. Character creation, your hero. So yeah, you choose your playbook. The ones they're telling us about right now are the Bold, the Guardian, the Hammer, the Icon, the Idealist, and the Successor. You'll note that this is basically all based around just sort of personality, kind of more archetypes, and not necessarily anything particularly about bending or anything like that at the moment. So that's kind of interesting. We'll get to these later on when they go over them in more detail. I do like this bit with like name your character, Earth Kingdom names. Use 2 syllables each for both games. Syllables like this. You can use names of precious stones, plants, or concepts as an Earth Kingdom style name as well. Fire Nation names. Let's see. Lan, Ran, Tai, Vazo. You can see that they're trying to give you some prompts about coming up with different things. So that's kind of interesting. You can see they don't really want to go too much into the whole clan name thing because they obviously don't have access to a list of all the different clans. So they're kind of like, let's not really go over that. So that's kind of interesting. I know about names. Again, some of these ones are kind of almost weird, like Choki, Dechen, Gyurme, Jamyang, Kenchok. They roughly fit, but like they feel very different than a lot of the ones that we actually do have right now. Water tribe names. The same with these. I feel like there's some of them feel like good, other ones not as much. There's a double A name. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, we covered like training, so this is how you go about moves. This is where this quick starter guide especially doesn't really have too much information on, and it says as much basically later on that they really don't feature a lot of the special moves or anything like that will be in the final game. So when it comes to stuff like bending and like the actual like uniqueness of Avatar, not a lot of the abilities are actually here at all related to that, which is a little bit unfortunate that there's not even like one ability necessarily that really relates to like, here's an example of a water bending ability that you would learn and what it would do within the game, that sort of thing. So they talk about fighting style and so on, which is kind of interesting. You cover your background, so like military, Kyoshi warriors, Iroh, Kuvira, monastic, Aang, fire sages, outlaw, Tokuga. So there's a few kind of like deeper cuts here as well. Flying Opera Company, Jed and the Freedom Fighters, privileged, Asami, Zuko, the Beifong family. Again, the one thing I'd say about some of this stuff is like they are really assuming that you know what the Flying Opera Company actually is, because in this book they don't actually tell you what the Flying Opera Company is, because they didn't really cover the idea of Daofei groups when they went over Kyoshi's era. They just assume you know it. So I do wonder in the final product just how much like lore explanation there will actually be, so you actually know some of this stuff. But anyway, we'll go on. Urban, so they even mentioned Jargala here, Lek, Tagaka, so that's all kind of interesting. Again, like a relatively minor character, Tagaka, who doesn't play like a huge role throughout like all those 2 books. Like here's a character who's really only appears in about the first quarter. So like they're really relying on you to actually know quite a bit. The demeanors of your characters, the history of your character. And then here's the stats, I suppose. This is what you'll basically be rolling the dice for most of the time. So you have creativity, focus, harmony, and passion. And you have like, every playbook starts out with 2 stats rated +1, 1 rated +0, and 1 rated -1. You can add +1 to one of those stats that's important to your character, either specializing in one of your strengths or offsetting one of your weaknesses. And stuff like that happens going forward. Fatigue is the health points, I suppose, effectively. Conditions are like status conditions, of course. Balance is quite an interesting thing in the game when you actually read into it. You can see here they have this sort of yin and yang track back and forth, that if you're +3 in this principle, it means you're -3 in this. They're not separate tracks, but having a stat in one means it affects your stat in the other. So if you're in the middle, you're in balance, but if you go off balance, it changes things. And when it comes to, I suppose, like when you're in the middle of fights and then like rolling the dice and bad things happen, you know, not everything is about like you take a point of damage, you take fatigue. Sometimes instead your balance gets shifted off balance towards the edges, and that's kind of cool that there's sort of like 2 meters, I suppose, within the game you do have to keep track of. And then the principles change depending on the character types. So you can see here the bold has a balance between loyalty and confidence. The guardian is between self-reliance and trust. The hammer is between care and force. Role and freedom. Forgiveness and action. Tradition and progress, which that's a big theme in Avatar as well. So that's all kind of cool to see. You know, there's your loyalty track. There's also like the idea of like creativity +1, focus +1, harmony 0, passion -1. So, you know, that gives you a sense of like add +1 to one stat to alter that, and it's going to change as the game progresses. You can also see here your training is basically your discipline. So you can choose to be a bender of any element, weapons expert, I suppose, or technology expert as the main sort of fighting disciplines. So there's that. And then, yeah, we'll go back up to where we were. We were on, balance again. So, you know, the bold's balance is between loyalty and confidence. They could have confidence of -2 and loyalty of +2, or the reverse. The exception is +0, where both of them are at 0. That's equilibrium. The moment of balance is a move your character must unlock through advancement before it can be used. Once you've unlocked it, however, you can use it any time your current balance is at your center. This explanation feels like a bit weird to me. In terms of, again, I feel some of the explanations don't get, like, on techniques, don't really get explained as well. In that, like, Eric is playing Teak, the Bold, and he's unlocked his moment of balance at his very first advance. You know, when his friends are threatened by Fire Sage Bai at the end of their adventure, Eric decides that he wants Teak to use his moment of balance right now to defeat the villain and save the day. He's at 0-0, so he uses the moment of balance. It shifts back to 0-0 at a crucial moment when he resists Fire Sage Bai's shifting of Teak's balance. He says, "I'm using it." The GM asks him to read it aloud, and it happens. Like, that just to me doesn't really feel like a particularly great explanation of like whatever that was. That it's just like, what is the, you know, what is it? What is the moment of balance? You know, for this character, it's just like that's kind of weirdly worded to me, at least, in terms of not really explaining what it does. So yeah, playbook moves and features, special qualities that the different characters has. So yeah, that just gets into a legacy of excellence. It's like you tick a few boxes. I think you get to choose 4 of them, and if you like meet any of those conditions over the course of the journey, something good happens, and then you choose some of the other options. Combat techniques, is there growth, connections to characters. And then here's a really interesting, here's the thing I mentioned about bending. You'll notice that aside from choosing which training you want during character creation, very little of the process is about in the game is about bending. That's not an accident. It's a huge part of the game, but it might not show up in the way you're expecting. In Avatar and Korra, most of the heroes are benders capable of amazing feats. The ones who aren't benders are often incredible masters of weapons or technology that rival bending, holding their own against capable benders in tough situations, and sometimes even triumphing. But regardless of their bending prowess or other fantastic abilities, the stories of Avatar Legends characters aren't really about their bending. Instead, the characters use their bending to go on adventures in the service of their story, finding the role they have to fill in the world, exploring the drive inside their heart that moves them, caring for the people in their lives that matter. Bending in Avatar works the same way. You use it constantly, but it's not your story. All of the trainings, including bending, are tools your character uses to get stuff done. whether that's fighting to protect the innocent from immediate harm or attempting to convince the political leaders of a place to take the problems of ordinary people seriously. What does that look like in the game? Trainings don't have a lot of limits, so you get a chance to say when and how your training is useful. Sometimes it's obvious. I want to waterbend that boat back to us so I can save the people on it. But sometimes it's more subtle. I want to earthbend out little handholds all up the side of this building so we can climb it. Either way, the mechanics of Avatar are going to support and challenge you as you use your powers. As you push yourself to accomplish great things with your training, you'll find cost and complications that make these accomplishments meaningful. When things are easy, like lighting a small fire with your firebending, you won't need to invoke the mechanics at all. Just remember your training is always real. You can't waterbend a boat if you can't waterbend. If you're a firebander, so there's a mistake there. That should be bender, not bander. You'll have to swim to that boat instead, and there are special combat techniques that are only available to masters of bending, weapons, or technology. Skills like lightning redirection or metal bending must be learned from others on your journey. Again, like I said, this quick start guide does not cover like any of this. So it is a weird one in that like it's just meant to be a quick start guide that is ultimately meant to make you want to buy the final book. But I don't like that there's not even like a single example of, if you're a waterbender, like here is a move you can learn and this is what it does. Because otherwise they're just saying that as a bender in the middle of like discussing things with the other characters and the GM, you can use your bending to sort of help to solve problems outside of the mechanics and stuff like that. Like if you have a firebender in your group and you need light, the firebender solves that. Like you don't need to roll for that. But in a fight, like what special moves does a firebender have outside of just they're rolling the dice in the exact same way as a waterbender would, but in terms of the fiction of your story, it's a different bending element coming out. That's what I want to see. So this felt like a bit like, I get why it's here in terms of the explanation. They don't want the game to just be like bending simulator, basically. But they also don't really cover any of the details, really, which is kind of weird to me. So yeah, playing the game, they covered the idea. It's about conversation between the GM and the players and so on. And, you know, if you don't actually have a clue on how these games work, this is really cool to just go over how it actually works. That, like, what's the... like, what exact way do you, like, word and approach having this conversation of, like, how much of it do you keep in character versus how much of it do you actually keep, like, as talk on the table outside of the universe. So, you know, the example they give here is like the GM says, so I want to set the next scene in the locker rooms backstage before the Earth Rumble tournament, if that sounds good. Daehyun and Kui Wuzan, you're back there warming up for your upcoming tag team match when the boulder comes looking for you in a panic. Miss Shima Bukuro, you're their manager. You want to be hanging around too? ? So, you know, it kind of highlights that, you know, it's not you at all times having to act like your character. You can have discussions that are about sort of like from almost like the writing perspective of the story to see if things are going in the right direction. But, you know, it's good if you really don't actually know at all what's going on. Moves, they cover it here, but they also cover it in more detail like later on. And again, like they already start to get into the idea here of like when you see something in bold that says rely on your skills and training, that is a signal to you that roll your dice, so like something's going to happen here. If you want to trick an NPC, that means roll a dice. And they mention roll a dice. If it's less than 6, it's a miss. If it's 7 to 9, it's a soft hit. If it's 10 plus, it's a full hit. But again, like, where's the information about how many dice you actually roll? It says it's somewhere along the way. I think it comes up in a few pages. They do roughly mention the idea of, you know, like you use 2d6 to actually like do it. So you should be using like your 6-sided dice to play this game, which is fine. It's just surprisingly, that core aspect of playing the game, it's not really mentioned too much. Now, logically, you can infer that that's what they mean, just because the scale is like 10 plus is a hit, 7 to 9 is a sort of partial success. 2 6-sided dice is really the only way that kind of works. But anyway, so that's fine. There's the fatigue meter explained over here. Conditions are explained here. So, afraid is that you take a -2 to your roll for intimidating and calling people out. Angry is you take -2 to comfort and support and assess a situation, and so on. So these conditions can impact you as well. This is how you clear the conditions, which is by being comforted by other player characters, or by basically using that emotion, I suppose. So if you're angry, let it out and it goes away. If you're afraid, run away. Take a foolhardy action. Make a personal sacrifice. So on. That's kind of cool in terms of the mechanics of the game also sort of influence like the dynamic between the characters and so on. So here's balance again, forgiveness and action. So yeah, the idealist has to shift towards forgiveness. Her marker goes 1 space to the left, so she's at forgiveness +3. If she has to shift towards action or towards her center, she goes 1 space to the right. Makes sense. NPCs can have balance, but they only have minor tracks. Balance moves, so you have resisting, shifting your balance, living up to your principle, calling people out. This seems kind of interesting in that there's like complexities here. So yeah, here's the one mention of the dice roll here, 2d6. This little line here of rolling without stats is, the one mention that like, oh yeah, these are the dice you should use. So that's interesting. So yeah, that's how that works. Deny a call out, basic moves. So yeah, this is, I suppose, what you're doing most of the time when like you're not in combat and just stuff is happening. You can plead, intimidate, trick, rely on your skills and training, push your luck, assess the situation, comfort or support, and you roll based on a different stat that you have. So harmony here, passion for intimidate, creativity for trick, this one's focus, and so on. So that's kind of cool. Combat moves, it explains how kind of combat works, which is actually kind of cool, the way they've made it work, and that you can use techniques, but then you learn special techniques, again, none of which they cover really in this guide particularly. Yeah, the full game will have more information on training and learning techniques, but for now you just need to know the basic techniques and the one special move that you have. And it does cover the idea of when you learn a move, it's in a status of being learned, then it is practiced, then it's mastered. So you have to kind of roll the dice to become more proficient at using your move. So that's kind of cool. You can't just go in straight away and be like, oh, I learned lightning generation and just use it to win everything. And yeah, here's how it works. NPCs choose approaches in secret. The player characters choose their approaches in public. Everyone reveals their choices, and then you resolve the roles. Defenders, the roles for defenders go first. The attackers go second, and then those who choose to avoid and evade go last. And then the approaches. Where did we cover this? It's yeah, the approach is this. It's like you choose to either defend and respond, advance and attack, or evade and observe. And so the GM in secret says that, you're being attacked by these 5 people. Like 2 of them choose to defend, 2 of them choose to attack. The players don't know that until the rolls happen, and then they have to make their choices in public, which is interesting. And then yeah, here you can see the basic techniques. So for defend and respond, you have retaliate, block, and retreat. Advance and attack has strike, seize a position, and smash. Evade and observe has test balance, show off, or watch a foe. And they all have like different effects based on what's going on. So yeah, that's kind of cool. Character helping seems like a nice mechanic of just like you can add +1 to someone else's roll if you want to. This is how kind of growth works. And yeah, running the game. I do like this in terms of just, how do you be a GM in a game like this? And what are you actually meant to do? You have to make the world feel real, make the companion stories meaningful. You want to find out what happens yourself, of course. And the idea is you try to create a world with a deep history. You address the characters, not the players. You're meant to be their biggest fan, so you're meant to want them to succeed. So that's a key point. Ask questions and then let them answer. Treat them all equally, of course. Remember the history and world of the characters, of course. Emphasize lessons. Give NPCs drives, fears, and hopes. Make conflicts moral choices. Use imbalance instead of evil. And seek consequences besides death. So just be fair. Don't try and be super punishing within the game and stuff like that. And when they roll misses on their rolls, you're meant to do stuff like inflict fatigue or put a condition on them. They missed, so they're afraid now, or something like that. Their balance shifts towards one way or the other. You're allowed to kind of make stuff like that happen. You can make it more of a plot reveal that, like, you missed, it causes conflict, so this comes out, that sort of thing. You can make, a conversation escalate into violence and cause a fight to happen. A risky opportunity happens. Stuff like that's kind of cool. Like, just that here are some options on how to like tackle make the players kind of have a more of a challenge, I suppose. Sometimes a miss means the player characters don't get what they wanted, but it can also mean that they get what they wanted in exactly the wrong way. For example, if a character rolls a miss while relying on skills and training to pick a lock, you could escalate to violence as guards see them before they can finish picking the lock, or you could offer a risky opportunity by saying their lockpick breaks in the lock, but they think the door is flimsy enough that they could break it down, even though that would make a lot of noise. So, that's kind of cool. And they have the quote here of like, look, Sokka, you're going to fail a lot before things work out. Fail over and over and over again. So just, that's what a game like this is about. Like the misses have to happen to make the game interesting. Offer mystery, let them talk. The GM is the one who actually plays the NPC characters. And these are actually kind of interesting ideas here of like, minor NPC only has like some basic information on them. Moderate NPC has like 5 fatigue boxes, 3 conditions. Major NPCs have this, and then this seems kind of crazy in terms of like, wow, I'd love to see someone play a game where they have something like this big of like a group of 21 plus NPCs is treated as an NPC of 3 steps of greater importance. So NPCs 21 plus minor characters are treated with 11 fatigue boxes and 6 conditions. So that's like kind of crazy. And then a large group chooses 3 extra attacks. So kind of interesting. So and then here's some specific information on the Forbidden Scroll adventure. So the night before the coronation ceremony for Ozai, Fire Sage Bai arrested several intruders trying to steal a historical scroll from the Dragonbone catacombs in Royal Caldera City, also known as Harry Bulkin. Now, this is one of those things where, like, in terms of the canon thing I was talking about earlier on, Royal Caldera City is stated in, like, it's like the art book, and then the Kyoshi novels have also mentioned it. Harry Bulkin has never, in my mind, ever been mentioned, like, anywhere in Avatar. So to me, that is new to this. And it's not necessarily that this actually plays too much of a role specifically in this story. So it feels like that is just, like, an extra piece of information that is technically canon in this, that we've learned the name for this place prior to it being the royal city. That's kind of interesting. But I don't know. That's kind of interesting. So, I'm not really sure about, like, why they did that or not. So in the chat there, what Harry Bulkin means Caldera City in Malay, apparently. Okay. That's interesting. Still, like, I suppose the fact that they brought it to attention here in this book, that the story that they want to note that this is another name for it that hasn't been said anywhere else is kind of interesting. But anyway, like, using this adventure, so the summary of it is yeah, here's the summary here. The clock. So this is an interesting one where it has more of a set story to help guide you a little bit more. So it's a time pressure situation, introduction to all the characters, important characters, locations, advice for the GM, and so on. And so on. So yeah, adventure starts with the player characters in a Fire Nation prison. They tried to steal an important scroll of Fire Nation history the prior night, but they were caught in the act and captured by Fire Sage Bai. In the introduction, players fill in a few details about how they've become imprisoned, but they're always freed by Fire Sage and Yuan in the early hours of the morning before the city is truly awake. He knows they tried to steal a scroll and gives it to them, along with any items they had on them, as a sign of trust, asking them to smuggle him out of the city. So that's the main premise for the story. So kind of cool stuff overall. So yeah, he's become disillusioned with the Fire Nation. His actions contributed to a number of atrocities during the war. So, even though this is, just a made-up sort of version of the story for this, that's actually like detailed kind of backstory. Interesting. So yeah, he managed to escape his room thanks to a friendly guard he'd known for years. He believes they might be the perfect people to smuggle him out unnoticed now that he's a wanted man. After they're released, the players can choose how they want to smuggle him out of the city, if they even want to try and smuggle him out at all. No matter what they decide to do about the Sage, they must get out of the city before they're recaptured. He knows the scroll is missing, so that's just a lot of the details here. So yeah, Yuan has a friend, Sun Po, who is head of a merchant fleet. She could smuggle the PCs and Yuan out of the city on one of her ships, but her offices are being watched by Fire Sage Bai. A band of street kids called the Fire Finches know the ins and outs of the cities and can most likely get them out of the city if they earn their trust. The Burning Ember gang could also do it. So that's kind of cool. And then here's cool. This is actually really interesting, the idea of like, what's on the scroll? This adventure doesn't specify what's on the scroll, because you should tailor the content to your game and the players. During the 100-Year War, the Fire Nation's leadership rewrote some of its history to justify its violent expansionist actions to its people. Fire Nation children weren't taught other perspectives in school, only what the Fire Lord wanted them to know, and many people lived in ignorance about what truly happened outside their borders. So, in this case, they're trying to, preserve a piece of history and use it for an advantage later on. So that's kind of interesting. And then, the clock here. So you can see, event 1, in the change from early morning to morning, you can see that this happens. Change 2, going to the afternoon, we see, so they're just kind of establishing that, like, in the city, in the area, this stuff is happening. Like, this festival is happening, these people are around at this time of the day, and so on. And then, as you go from evening to night, the fireworks happen, the people are watching it, the city locks down as Bai is ready for the PCs to try to flee. No matter how the PCs decide to leave the city, Bai is waiting for them. So you have to fight him regardless. Most likely you fight him in order to escape. So here's how you go about telling the story. How did you get there in the first place? Because the story is actually starting when you've already sort of like failed initially. So you have to tell a bit of backstory, which is kind of cool. The scroll, here's some ideas for the scroll. A detailed record for the plans for the genocide of the air nomads, recorded by Fire Nation military commanders, approved by Fire Lord Sozin. A signed treaty from before the war, overseen by Roku. Technical plans that may reveal Fire Nation technologies. Makes sense. They're all kind of logical explanations that sort of fit the era. So here's some of the characters as well, just to give you a sense for like the depth that's going on here. Like, look, a full kind of backstory for this kind of completely made up character. Fire Sage Yuan, Fire Sage Bai, and you can see again, 10 fatigue boxes for each of these, They have a technique specifically. I suppose, yeah, there's one of our first times actually seeing here some actual fire attacks. So this, I guess, is an ability you can use if you choose to be a firebender. I forgot to look at this actually. Throw a spinning disc of pure flame. Mark fatigue to inflict 2 conditions on a foe engaged with you. If your target blocks, dodges, or otherwise avoids this attack, it sets everything around them aflame. That's kind of cool. That's just take cover. So yeah, we finally found one here, an elemental attack that you can learn. So that's kind of cool. And then we have a moderate NPC, 5 fatigues. You can see their principal balance meter only goes from 0 to 3 on one principle here, 0 to 2 on one principle here. Here's another major NPC, and look, this guy Phi Lan has chi blocking. So what this says is a pinpoint weapon or hand strikes to block a foe's chi. Mark fatigue to block a foe's chi with your strikes, inflicting a condition and rendering a limb useless, and blocking bending with that limb. An enemy with 1 fewer useful limbs chooses 1 fewer technique to use each exchange. So that, I guess, is pretty powerful, because if you just attack normally, you get like 1 attack, and then if you roll really well, you get a 2nd attack. And then the only other way to get like extra attacks, based on what we've seen so far, is to use your like ability, which maybe gets you 1 more attack. So if you get chi blocked too many times, you're in real trouble as a bender. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, momentum throw. And yeah, just really cool stuff with a lot of these other kind of characters. And yeah, here's more stuff on the locations, divided into Harry Bulkan and Harbor City. And there's a little bit of a map here, so that's kind of cool. Just again, the fact that they could have just called it Royal Caldera City at all times, but they choose to choose an older name is kind of interesting. And yeah, just it fits, the idea of like you're captured, you're put in a very kind of important location, and here's where you go from there. Zoolon's legacy: a troupe of skilled performers in lavish costumes acts out a play dedicated to the late Fire Lord of Zoolon. They speak of his great prowess as a conqueror, his infinite wisdom as the former ruler of the Fire Nation. The play ends with the magnificent Ozai taking the mantle of blessed Fire Nation ruler, the spitting image of his great father. Sunpo's rival Leva is in attendance at the performance. Leva's most recent hobby has been a patron of the arts, and this troupe is her most recent investment. Okay, so an option, I guess, to do something with the story. And here's some locations. Again, Zoryu Park. Like, again, is that made up, or are we to assume there actually is a place in the Fire Nation called Zoryu Park? That's kind of interesting. Mabo's is a bow stall attached to a small home. Sunpo's offices. First Lord's Harbor, we know, is a place. Underground tunnels. GM advice. And yeah, just like obvious questions with this setup for a story of like, how does it end? What if they ditch this really important character? Like, is he allowed to just not play a role in the story? And the answer is obviously like, yes, but he's an important character. He's going to try and do something. What if the scroll is lost or destroyed? Well, if it happens, it happens, but this might happen in response to that. It's just kind of cool, kind of logical, giving you a sense for like, okay, yeah, there's always a way out of these situations, and so on. But yeah, here's the basic move situation. Plead, push your luck, and so on. And again, what happens on each kind of roll. So you can see here with plead, on a 7 or a 9, the person you're pleading with needs something more. Evidence, that is the right course, guidance in making the right choices or resources to aid them before they act. On a 10 plus, they act immediately. So that makes sense. Assessing a situation, 7 to 9, you can ask 1 question. On 10, you can ask 2 questions. So that's kind of cool. And then intimidate is like 10 plus. You get to eliminate one of these options, but then the person you've intimidated does one of them. So it seems pretty interesting. Balance moves are here. Personal growth. Combat moves. Again, this is how it works. On a 7 to 9, use one basic or mastered technique. On a 10, choose one from this list instead. Mark 1 fatigue to use a learned technique, to use 1 practice technique, or 2 basic or mastered techniques. On a miss, you stumble, but you can shift your balance away from the center to use a basic technique. So that all is cool. Again, we went over this earlier on, the campaign worksheet here towards the end. Here is the sheet that's already pre-made for the, if you just want to play the basic story where they have the characters already made for you. Here is Teak the Bold. I suppose we'll just go through these because I actually haven't read them myself really to see what the characters are meant to be. Teak fled his southern water tribe village with his friend Aniki, the Guardian, and her baby brother Minak. When the Fire Nation troops attacked his home and sought to kill the benders like himself who lived there. During his travels to the Fire Nation capital, Teak has often thought of his great uncle who was off fighting in the war. The young bender aspires to be a powerful waterbender like his uncle. He has to be. The Fire Nation must be stopped, and Teak knows he can be instrumental in ending its domination. The only problem is he hasn't yet been able to prove how great he can be. Teak heard about the Fire Nation hiding a valuable scroll in the Dragonbone catacombs and sees stealing it as the opportunity to show he hasn't squandered his gifts. So his background is outlaw wilderness, his demeanor is impatient. His look is scrawny but acrobatic with unkempt clothes and bright eyes. He has a water whip fighting style. They say his legacy of excellence is that he, I suppose, wants to successfully lead his companions into battle, punch someone you probably shouldn't punch, pull off a ridiculous stunt, and restrain a friend from making a bad choice. With the idea with that move that when you fulfill a drive, strike it out and clear a condition. So if you're afraid, you can get rid of it, that sort of thing. He has the tag team attack. Again, this is sort of the bit of a problem here, in that like he's a waterbender, but like his special fighting technique is just tag team. I want more of the special abilities like they had for some of the NPCs up there. And yeah, here's some special moves specific to being the bold. And again, the loyalty confidence, +1/+1/0/0. Aniki the Guardian, +1/+2/+0/+1. So that's interesting. How do they get an extra +1? Because isn't everything by default like where's the blank ones? +1. Okay, so +1/+1/0 -1. So how does Aniki get this? That's like 2 or 3 extra stats. But anyway, Aniki was a child when she had to flee her southern water tribe village with her friend Teak and her baby brother Minak strapped to her back. Her home was attacked by the Fire Nation forces looking for waterbenders, and Minak had shown a proficiency for bending at an early age. Aniki knew she could never return home, otherwise she'd lose her brother and endanger her family. So the only thing she could do was keep moving. Teak told Aniki about a scroll that could expose the Fire Nation for what it is. And even though Aniki thinks it's a terrible idea to break into the Dragonbone catacombs, she's decided to do it anyway, to protect Teak and to get something she's wanted so desperately for herself, revenge on the villains which have taken so much from her. So again, they're from Grey Wolf Village. That makes sort of sense, I suppose, as a name in the water tribe, but like, is that meant to be a real place, or is that completely made up? That's what I'd like to know. Weapons, cable-backed bow. And then the Guardian has this Protector's Burden thing, where you choose a war. So you choose one of the other players, and then you have all these questions which affect your stats when it comes to like protecting them. It seems quite cool if you want to have a character that's more focused on another one of the characters. Divert is a technique that they have. Trust, self-reliance. Wenley the Hammer. So this is the firebender. Fiery flying fists. Wenley grew up in the poorest part of Harbour City, where the strong exploit the weak and the authorities did nothing to stop it. Trying to protect the weak from bullies landed Wenley in a couple of brutal fights, but she kept picking them despite her sweet father trying to teach her restraint. True tragedy struck when Wenley's father was beaten to an inch of his life by some of Fan Lan's enforcers. They stole his daily wages while he was walking home in the early hours of the morning. Rather than investigate, the lazy police laughed off her father's injuries, which left him infirm and unable to work. Wenley knows no matter how hard she tries, she'll never change the system by playing by the rules, so she's decided to sneak into the Dragonbone catacombs and steal from the people who take the most, the Fire Nation's ruling class. From Harbor City. That's a cool idea for a character. Overwhelm is like the attack you can see. Bringing them down. So her adversary is Fire Sage Bai. And then the goal is to have your adversary exile them. Okay, so there's some cool stuff going on there. Zaipan the Icon. Earthbending dancing with the earth. That's kind of cool. Wall of Perfection. Zaipan grew up in the Fire Nation. Okay. But she's always been part of the Earth. Her parents told her they were guests of the Fire Nation. Unfortunately, as Zaipan grew older, she realized they were actually glorified prisoners. After her mother's death in captivity, Zaipan is the last of the Earth Dancers, a skilled group of earthbenders brought to the Fire Nation capital as a curiosa from the colony, something to admire and eventually to watch go extinct. Zaipan decided to escape her captivity, entertaining Fire Nation gentry, and managed to convince General Gong, who was in charge of watching her, to let her go. She fled to the Dragonbone catacombs, thinking there was a hidden exit out of Harry Bulkan there, and met her new friends when the guards closed in on her location. So there you go. This is a case of like the backstory for the characters explains how all the characters came to meet in the catacombs at that one time. So like they came together not as a proper team, failed initially, and now have to come together as a team to succeed. So that's a cool general idea for the story. Burden and tradition. So you have 3 responsibilities of your burden and tradition you are expected to assume: providing aid and succor to the downtrodden, guarding nature from corruption, safekeeping records and relics. You have 3 prohibitions. Seems cool. Sun Lin the Idealist. Dual throwing clubs. Sun Lin grew up as an orphan on the streets of Harbor City after their parents died in an accident mining ore to build warships for the Fire Nation. That terrible accident thought Sun Lin to be a true the true price of war, and they committed themselves to find a way to bring meaning to their parents' deaths. Luckily, Sun Lin didn't grow up embittered and alone, but was found by the Firefinchers, a child gang of low-level street criminals in a capital. Always hope. A disagreement with... Okay, former Firefinch. That's interesting. Okay, so, you know, there's a cool idea of, like, you could see in the setup here, the idea of, like, this character has a connection to this NPC, this character has a connection to this NPC, and you can see how, like, combined, there's a little bit of an issue with almost everything, and there's an option to do everything, so that's kind of cool. Yin Zin, the successor. From Dizin Island, outer island of the Fire Nation, owned by his family for generations, he learned to read from an unabridged history of the Fire Nation written by his mother, Zinlai, who inherited the title of National Historian. But a visit from his aunt threw his life into turmoil. He overheard a fight between his aunt and mother, where his aunt claimed everything his mother ever wrote was a lie. Now Yinzin searches for answers. He can't become a national historian until he knows for sure. Are the words of his mother penned a beautiful lie obscuring a horrid truth? So that's actually quite interesting as the idea for a character. Obviously, like, the idea that if his mother wrote history based on what the Fire Nation said, a lot of it is going to be a lie, and then he's going to find the truth. So that's cool. And then because he's the successor, it relates to the history, so that's all kind of cool. And then here's the general ones for the bold, the guardian, the hammer, the icon. You can see name, you take your background, you take your demeanor, choose your bending style or non-bending style, give it a little bit more of a specific name. you add 1 to one of these stats. There's your fatigue meter, what conditions you have, and then you keeping track of your special kind of thing here and your moves. And you can see here, like, you have one sort of built-in technique, and then you add on other stuff that you learn, and you can see it's learned, proficient, mastery, so it gets better as you go on. And each move is either defend and respond, advance and attack, evade and observe, which are the approaches in combat. Probably the bold is like the easiest one to, like, I think obviously explain, because when you choose the bold, your legacy of excellent is like you choose choose 4 of these. So you tick 4 of these initially that to try and accomplish, and they will get you kind of conditions removed. And I think that's basically it. So yeah, you can see, like, all the way up to the end here, like, that's a pretty solid amount of content that they give you here. Like I said, the only criticism I'd maybe have is just that, like, there's only 1 or 2 like bending related skills mentioned. Otherwise it seems quite good. But like I said, my main questions going into this are, like, in the final book, how much of a focus on, like, helping anyone reading the book to actually build up a foundation in Avatar knowledge and lore to actually tell a good story is there going to be? Like I mentioned there, the fact that they use, like, the Flying Opera Company as one of the examples of Dao Fei. No, wait. They use the Flying Opera Company as an example of characters who come from a sort of, like, outlaw background, without ever telling you, like, really, like, who that is. They're just assuming that, well, if you're reading this book, you probably have seen everything Avatar related, but that is not necessarily the case. I'm assuming there'll be a lot of people who will know about this RPG game who maybe won't even know there are novels or have not read the comics. Like, there's a lot of weird scenarios like that in the fandom, and that I hope they have a good amount of detail here. It does make me wonder, though, because I believe I looked it up, and the Root game, their core book is about, like, just over 200 pages. This is like 55. How much extra content is there going to be in the remaining, like, 150 pages? I'm guessing there's going to be a giant section that literally just goes over all the abilities, and there's going to be a lot of that. Beyond that, like, I'm assuming we're going to get a lot of other story suggestion stuffs, like this scroll story here. There's going to be a bunch of them based on the different eras, like a Korra based story, an Aang based story, that sort of thing. And beyond that, I guess they'll just really have to flesh out the section here at the start about, like, Water Tribes, Earth Kingdom, and the eras, and just, like, details like that, just so people know what they're doing and trying to do here. So yeah, I'm pretty excited because going back to this, it looks like they do some good stuff with their campaigns. Let me just go into the Kickstarter here. How much will shipping be? Do they do international shipping? I'm assuming that these games are available for international shipping. That'd be really disappointing if you can't actually order these if you're not from other countries. I'm assuming it mentions it somewhere here in the campaign, I'm guessing. Delays. I'm wondering, like, how many delays actually this will suffer, because it seems like this game Root has suffered quite a few delays and still hasn't properly officially released just yet. I'm assuming they're going to do everything that they can to make sure that with a licensed property that it won't be completely messed up with that. So I'm guessing they'll get some sort of, like, backing and support from Nick Viacom to make sure they have access to everything they need to make sure they hit any deadline that they set pretty much, and there'll only be like the most minor of minor delays if there even is any. That's my take on this, is that like they can't really afford to have this turn into a thing where, like you can see here, like on some of these things, like estimated delivery is like September 2020, but I don't think they've actually delivered that nearly a year on. Stuff like that. I don't think they'll make it happen like that. So that's going to be interesting to see. Oh yeah, here we go. Shipping. We're happy to ship the Root tabletop playing game anywhere in the world. So US, EU friendly, Canada friendly, and Australia friendly. So I think that covers obviously like most regions. I'm sure there's going to be some problem if you do live in other locations, like I guess Middle East and stuff like that. Maybe there's some trickiness there. Again, how expensive it is or not and stuff like that. Oh yeah, so here's cool. We will cover the cost of customs and VAT for those reasons. So yeah, that seems pretty good. That gives you a lot of confidence in that, like, okay, backed by Nickelodeon, they've already done ones before where they have this covered. You know, it might be a little bit expensive if you're maybe from a non-US region, but you know, you're not going to also get hit with, you know, customs and everything else. You're going to pay one price pretty much up front, and that's going to be it. Or, well, I guess you're going to pay whatever it is here, like 20, 40, 75, 100, or whatever, and plus a little bit more. And then, yeah, this is the thing here, fulfilled by Drive-Thru RPG. This is where you get the Quickstarter guide from. That, with all of these, I think you get the PDF. So even if they're maybe struggling to fulfill the physical stuff, the second I suppose they have the digital version ready to go, they'll have that out, which will be the quickest thing to get out, and you can get it through Drive-Thru RPG. So that all seems cool. So yeah, I'm excited to actually get that. And what's this? Optional buys. So I guess this will be interesting to see how they actually go about the Kickstarter in terms of like how much of this extra stuff is going to be like what do they call it, like a stretch goal, and how much of it's going to be there from the start. Because I could see myself going in on like to get some of this extra stuff, like that has like the maps or whatever, to have the decks with the abilities or whatever on them, just so you're not always having to read the details there. Roll 20. So you can see, like, here's all the stretch goals that they have here: cloth bag, dice. So yeah, we'll see as they go on, like what they have here. I wouldn't be surprised if it got over 1 million, but the question is, like, obviously, like, how many multiples of that are they going to actually fulfill? So yeah, that's everything that they did here. Deluxe books and satchel. Retailers. Deluxe books, base books, and satchel. Okay, so no. If they have maybe this offer, like if you want to get everything, I guess that would probably be the one here, like deluxe books and satchel, to get absolutely everything. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, that's, I suppose, everything I want to talk about for the most part in the stream. In terms of other videos I have coming out, obviously Suki Alone is out on the 27th. So I have my full spoiler review already recorded. So I'll release that video on the 27th for you guys on the release date of the book. I'll have a kind of bigger Avatar discussion video also coming out that week of Suki Alone. It might be like a day or two after I put out the spoiler review, but the video I've been kind of planning for a little bit, so it's kind of interesting. We'll see how that goes. Next week I probably will have at least like one kind of more notable Avatar video. Again, I don't want to spoil the topic for it just yet, but I at least have an idea for a video in the week, not just relying on news happening. And then other than that, like it's pretty much just waiting for like announcements and stuff like that. So of course the free comic book day announcement, when that eventually happens, I will be covering that. Hopefully the descriptions and stuff like that are interesting enough that it'll warrant perhaps a speculation discussion. But we'll see how that goes. And then I guess Comic-Con is coming up. We'll see what happens. Will it just be some merchandise news, or might they sort of sneak something out? Like, will there be a tease somewhere? Maybe not having a panel, but like an article will go up with an update on something. Who knows? Maybe. I'm not really sure. But yeah, we're definitely waiting for a lot of stuff to happen. Everything's kind of slow at the moment outside of, I'd say, merchandise is going well, but story content is kind of slower than it's ever been. But as someone who has read Suki Alone, I am really, really excited to see other people read Suki Alone. I think a lot of fans are going to be very happy with Suki Alone. I know I was, and I've been a little bit down on some of the more recent content, and this definitely got me kind of kind of remembering that they can do strong stories again, and that's probably the biggest thing of all. But again, unfortunately, they've done the thing again where right as they're hitting a stride, we don't know what's next for Avatar comics. Right as they get the Korra comics on track, there's been like a 2-year delay. 2 novels kick things off amazingly well. What are novels? There's all those sort of frustrations that relate to a lot of the extra material in terms of when we are actually going to get stuff or not. But it's fine. We're building up. This is our build-up year. This is not going to be the year that is like remembered, I think, for much beyond, this was the year they announced Avatar Studios. This isn't going to be the year I think they talk heavily about it. But it means next year needs to deliver. Definitely. 2022 needs to be a massive, massive Avatar year. Just with, I think, everything. And so stuff like Avatar Legends, I suppose we'll be getting more news about Avatar Legends stuff as we go forward. In that, if this is the first thing, I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing about like more clothing stuff officially come out, and us maybe returning to the way things were. Because I don't know if anyone in chat remembers back in like early original Avatar time period, like 2005, 6, a little bit of 2007. They were quite heavy with the amount of Avatar merch there was. There was Avatar everything, and then they realized that they probably went in too big too quick, and then they stopped and never built back up again when the fandom the series actually got like really, really popular. So it feels like they're actually like playing the merchandise game correctly this time out. So it seems like this is like a lot of stuff. But yeah, we're going to be getting, I guess, Avatar party bags, school boxes, paint kits and stuff like that. Much more minor pieces of Avatar merchandise, to the point where like collectors, like, are you really going to want to get like a booklet, like a pen and paper set that features Avatar just because it features Avatar? This is not like 3-4 years ago when Inside Editions put out like a diary that's just basically paper for Avatar, and it's one of the few merchandise releases of the year. We're going into an era where we're going to have Avatar nearly everything. So that's a huge change from where things used to be. So Avatar Legends is, I guess, what they're using to be the kind of title for all this sort of stuff. So they don't have to, they can have more stuff like this, where they can have Avatar and Korra, Aang and Korra in the same product, without needing to just use the titles of both shows. So Avatar Legends is our general thing. There's also the hype about, like, you know, everyone wants an Avatar video game. At this stage, it seems very, very likely that is going to happen. Now, this is just, you know, they have the license of the trademark for Avatar Legends to use for video games and all this other sort of stuff. This doesn't mean we're getting it, but it means there's a possibility. They're thinking about this stuff. And it doesn't seem crazy for us to consider that they're doing that, because Avatar Studios is officially announced. They're doing multiple movies, shows, stuff like that. Of course, I think video games going into the future and stuff like that is going to be a major thing. Definitely. So, again, especially the fact that, you know, they did Avatar Legends at roughly the same time as they got the Braving the Elements license is really telling. Definitely. So, I suppose, yeah, speaking of Braving the Elements, I have listened to every episode. The podcast this week was the Eric Coleman interview, which was actually, like, relatively interesting. I didn't talk about it because, like, there was no news, of course, and to me, it was just a thing where, like, arguably what they should have done is actually just had, like, a triple interview with Mike Bryan and Eric Coleman, because it felt like it was just, like, the third member of that conversation, but they interviewed one of them separately. Like, he clearly knows his Avatar. It was interesting to see him talk about how, like, he specifically didn't show his kids Avatar when they were, like, young, because he wanted to wait for them to be old enough to properly appreciate it. And, you know, you could tell he knew what was going on. Like, he was talking about the character dynamics he likes a lot. And that's, to me, a really fascinating thing. That they were talking about, that, you know, he is this kind of, you know, big business, you know, Nick guy. But here's the guy who was like, I want Nickelodeon to do something different. I want Nickelodeon to have a show that is more focused on, like, characters evolving over the course of multiple episodes and a plot. That's really, really interesting to me. That, like, you know, very few other shows on Nickelodeon are like that, where you kind of have to watch them in the right order. And here is the guy who kind of really wanted a Nickelodeon show where you had to watch it in, like, sequence to get the character moments correctly. And then, yeah, like in chat there, you know, the big question of when Avatar Studios stuff finally comes out, you know, what are they going to do? Are they going to do the Netflix style where they put everything out at once, or do they do it week by week? I definitely, as a content creator, would prefer it if they did it week by week. Because I value the fan discussion week to week. And in the years when, like, Voltron was on the air, and even when, like, Dragon Prince comes out, they are so stressful, those releases, trying to cover a full 13 episode season. Even Dragon Prince only having, like, 7 or 8 episodes a season. It's a lot of content at once to cover, because you kind of have to watch it all straight away to not be spoiled, but then you have to realize, like, oh, and now I have to do content about all this sort of stuff. So I do much appreciate if they did it week by week. Kind of like we've done with The Mandalorian, like we're doing with The Bad Batch now, like they do on, like, Disney Plus with, like, you know, Loki, which just the first season finished this week. I definitely want that experience with Avatar again. I think it'd be really actually kind of disappointing if they just, you know, we got a new series of Avatar and boom, it's all here all at once. That'd be such a weird experience, because we're so used to it always being done, like, sort of step by step, episode by episode. I don't think they would. I really don't think they would, especially now that they're theoretically not going to be, you know, they're not on Netflix anymore. That's not the deal. It's Paramount Plus. Admittedly, I haven't looked at Paramount Plus to see how they order things themselves, because, like, I don't know what new stuff they necessarily have that's, like, super popular at the moment. But I assume they have the capacity to, if they wanted to, just do it episode by episode. And by the time an Avatar show is ready, they'd absolutely be in the position to make that happen. But yeah, I think that they need to do that. And they probably will. Like, they're aware this is huge. It's the only Paramount Plus thing that got announced as being just like a studio to itself. They're not going to just throw it out there and just like expect it to, just do it all at once. That feels more like a Netflix thing. So yeah, I definitely think week to week is more what they're going to do. But Braving the Elements. About the only other thing I'd have to add is just that I find it weird that they are going so slowly through the series. That we're on like week, 4 or 5 at this point, and they've only done 2 episodes. They have confirmed, obviously, that the one coming up on Tuesday is going to be 103, Southern Air Temple. But it is kind of telling that so far the podcast that's been primarily advertised as being a recap has only done like 2 episodes in like X many weeks. It's kind of weird. Especially stuff like the Eric Coleman interview, where it was only about 45 minutes. I feel like they probably should have just done an hour-long episode with doing like the episode and then added the interview onto the end, like 2 in 1, or do more like double episodes per week, like an episode and an interview or something like that. Just because like the whole, when it was announced, like it's 40 episodes, I guess this confirms to us for sure season 2 is definitely going to happen, because by the sounds of things, by the time we get to the 40th episode of this podcast, we're probably only going to be at the end of season 1 of Avatar, with the amount of interviews they probably have coming up still, and how slowly they're actually going through the series. Given that they didn't do episode 1 and 2 at the same time, I get the impression they're not going to do too many of the other podcasts at the... they're not going to do podcast episodes about like multi-part episodes at once. So yeah, it's a weird situation. I definitely don't feel that the podcast is like this massive like must listen to every week thing. But it's nice to have. It's a nice sort of like they call it a companion thing. It's cool that there's an official podcast at this point, and it's a sign of just how better things are for Avatar. But it would be nice to have more mainline content to be supported by this, rather than it feeling that like week to week the podcast is sort of the main event for now, while they're still building up to other stuff. So there's that. So yeah, there's that. And yeah, that's really all there really is. And yeah, I'm excited to see them do like their first like voice actor interview. At this stage, it does look like the interviews are all going to be separate things to the recaps, because the recap episodes, it seems like they're recording them much more like recently, potentially only like a week in advance of them actually being released, if even later than that. So that is nice to know that they're not like 30 episodes in, that they already have caught up and are aware of fan reaction to the first like few episodes basically. But it means that actually when they finally do get around to announcing Avatar Studios stuff properly, I guess this is the podcast where we will see them actually maybe get Mike and Brian on to talk a little bit more about this stuff. And they maybe can be more of an official like news source when that stuff comes around. Again, we're going to have to wait a while to actually, I suppose, see that happen. But it looks like they have the access to pretty much anyone that they want. So that's the way to do it, in my opinion. Now, obviously, we'd still be expecting like most of the major news to happen through, Comic-Con announcements, or I'd be I'd be probably more excited if they just like announced like a kind of Avatar Direct thing on their own. Like, it doesn't have to be through Comic-Con, but like just in a few weeks they just decide Avatar Studios video announcement thing, and they're just kind of doing it like completely on their own. Lots of other companies are doing that, like a lot of the video game places are. They have the ability to do that. They don't need it to always be aligned with all this other stuff. But like I said, Comic-Con, there's stuff there. Like, I think the main thing I'm interested in is the High Republic panel, just because in terms of Star Wars, like, while we're still waiting for like more Mandalorian, the Kenobi show and stuff like that, I'd say the High Republic probably is some of the stuff in Star Wars I am the most interested in at this point. They really have managed to make that work really, really well. That Star Wars, outside of the Mandalorian, had been in, I suppose, kind of not great of a position. If you considering that like the Clone Wars is like pretty much pre-Disney era stuff that they've had to bring back out of fan demand and so on. This is the first, like, I suppose, properly full-on Disney, like, super original thing that just is really getting it right. And is like, I'd love to see them do a sort of publishing campaign for Avatar, similar to the kind of the High Republic, where they just choose an era of Avatar that's never been covered and have like the novels and like a comic series be the things that focus on that era. This era does not have to be in a movie or a TV series. It's just, publishing, content. Because I think in terms of like the depth, I think that it's a way to get some of the more, interesting content that we've got. In the same way that the Kyoshi novels are so popular because, yes, it's Kyoshi, but because the novel format allowed them to cover Avatar in probably the most detailed way we've potentially like ever seen it covered. And that's what stood out to people just as much as a lot of the other aspects of it. So a kind of Avatar High Republic era type thing I really, really like to see. In terms of like, again, covering a more like earlier kind of few, maybe the next Avatar or a few Avatars after one, that's maybe an option to do it there. If you're not up for doing a series there, have the publishing be the stuff that focuses really heavily on that. That's my suggestion, just because I do feel High Republic is working quite well overall. So there's a sort of Avatar Star Wars connection type thing, and it's just like highlighting that, like, Star Wars is this massive property that had been in a kind of awkward position for a while and is getting back up and going again properly, where more and more of the things that they do are beginning to become really, really popular again. Avatar is trying to sort of become just as big, so it has to get this expansion correct as well. So I hope it does that, and I think it probably will. So there's that. But yeah, High Republic stuff, yeah, like I find myself really just interested in that, like probably more interested in like the release of the next High Republic book, Out of the Shadows, coming out on the 27th I think as well, than I am like the finale for Bad Batch, which is kind of interesting. I didn't think that would be the case, but it kind of is. And then in chat, like yeah, High Republic manga, I absolutely want to check that out and see what it's like. I know it's been delayed a little bit, but Star Wars manga, they're finally sort of catching on that this is the sort of stuff that they need to do. So want to see that. And yeah, like where's my Avatar manga? I know there was that Zuko movie continuity manga, but canon Avatar manga, I'd love to see something like that. Obviously the weekly format of a Shonen Jump style thing, that would be really cool to just get super, super regular content. But just Avatar done in that art style would be a manga art style would be excellent to see. So there's that. Other than that, I suppose for me with Avatar, it's kind of just like waiting for a lot of like stuff I've ordered to come in. Like obviously this week I had two things come in. Stretching to get this. I had the Book 3 Aang Funko Pop come in this week. I obviously did a video on the channel. And then the Katara Diamond Select statue, which I have over there. Again, I did a video on a few days ago. I have the Zuko ordered, and I think it's meant to be out in the next couple of weeks. I ordered it from somewhere different. I don't know if I'm going to be getting it anytime soon. The same goes for like the first Best Action Aang figure. I have that ordered, but I don't know when I'm going to receive that. I ordered one of the QMX Q-Pals, the new kind of company that announced their Avatar stuff a few weeks ago, the kind of plushy Aang. I got that ordered. Again, not sure about the release date of it and what's going on there. So I'm waiting on that. And then like a lot of the books I obviously have a pre-order as well. So there's that. But yeah, in chat there, did you hear about the Dark Horse reveal? Yeah, I covered this towards the start of the video, that they announced this. We're still waiting, of course. I don't get it. I really, really don't get it, because it makes them look kind of so bad that it feels really disorganized. Like, if you go here, like if you just search Avatar on Dark Horse, it looks like they haven't updated this in months, because this obviously, like, it doesn't look great. That here's this event that is happening in 4 weeks. Like, it's coming up August 14th. It's not that long away at all. And all you have to say about it is just that there are 2 stories. Here are the franchises those stories will be. Plain, like, cream colored cover with logos and nothing else, and creative teams, no description. It's one of the weirdest things I've seen. And look, it's cool, I guess, that, you know, Free Comic Book, they're sort of hyping up, you know, they know it's sort of a big deal, the Avatar cover reveal. But, you know, soon, when in relation to the reveal of the cover for a Free Comic Book Day book, shouldn't be like more than a few days. So I hope this happens at some point, like early next week, and we're not left waiting too much longer. And then yeah, the other thing is like this: why do they still have these up with the old covers, even though the new cover's been announced for ages at this point? Like, this book isn't even too far away, and they still have the old cover. And this is the official website product listing. It's just kind of weird. I think they have all of the updated release dates on this stuff. Like, yeah, February 9th for this. But, like, where's the Beast of the Four Nations on this website? Where is, you know, the information on that? That's been really, really weird. The fact that book isn't on Dark Horse, and Dark Horse themselves, I don't think have ever yet acknowledged the announcement of that book, which is kind of weird. Like, that book, you'd think, based on what it is, should have got like a pretty, like, almost major, like, news post announcement, but it's been announced with the wrong date, announced through comic solicitations, up everywhere now. I don't know what's going on. And yeah, about the only thing you can really use to explain all of this is just that because of Avatar Studios now, everything Avatar related just must have, yeah, a lot of approval to go through. But I don't know. Free Comic Book Day stuff is usually organized very, very long time in advance. I'm guessing this year is slightly different because they've had to change the date. But still, you know, basically every other book had their cover ready to go. And they're like, we're talking about like Marvel, Star Wars is in there as well in Free Comic Book Day. Why is Avatar like so special and managed weirdly that it's the one that like we wait until literally under a month before the event before we announce it? It's weird, and it's still the one, I suppose, kind of fear you have with Avatar going forward is that sort of big business meddling of like Nickelodeon and the treatment of it as a license, and how all of that stuff tends to work. It feels really weird with Nickelodeon, and obviously that's what happened with like Korra in terms of the production and other stuff that's happened. Like the one thing I always remember, like I just thought it was so shocking and like poor the way they handled this, was when the first Kyoshi novel was coming out, and a company contacted Nickelodeon, and they basically announced it as well, that they were going to do one of those book kind of loot crate boxes to coincide with the release of The Rise of Kyoshi. And it sounded really, really cool that you were going to get the book, a signed copy of the book by Mike, and I think FCE as well. So that was cool. But then you're also going to get all this other Avatar stuff, products with it. And they had to cancel that completely. And the owner of that company revealed that it was because basically Nickelodeon, through sort of lack of information about how this deal was meant to work, basically was like, oh, well, you can't actually do what we led you to believe you were allowed to do. You can't put like basically fan-made, stuff that you are going to make yourself for Avatar in this box. You can only use our official items. And of course, back when the first Kyoshi book came out, this was still sort of like before the merchandising stuff had properly like taken off. So there was like no Avatar merchandise. Like, what do Nickelodeon have up for sale that is like Avatar related that they can actually put in a box? And they basically went like, no, we sort of promised like 5 items at least. It's going to cost like double that just to get your like one item, was effectively the idea here. And I always remember that as just like, oh yeah, that's what it's like to deal with the sort of business side of Avatar. And I'm wondering, like, is that actually like still kind of the way it is, even for like Dark Horse, who have a good relationship with Nickelodeon because of all these books? Is it still like that to this day? I'm guessing to some degree it is. But how does that change now with Avatar Studios? Because it always feels a bit weird to me that, like the inside editions, the cookbook, the author of that, she talked about how she gets approval on that stuff from Nickelodeon, which is different than getting approval from like the writers or Mike and Brian. And it's like, how does that work? Like, do they have like basically an Avatar continuity person at Nickelodeon? Shouldn't that be a position at like Avatar Studios at this point? But then we also don't know, in terms of how Avatar Studios is structured, how it's going to work just from like, I suppose, like a social media perspective. Like, are there going to be Avatar Studios social media channels, or is it literally just that within Nickelodeon Viacom, Avatar Studios is just a thing that we are telling you exists, and you will hear about it in news announcements, but very little publicly will be Avatar Studios as such? And it's just so difficult to know what exact way they're going to handle that, because at least to me, I interpreted it to some degree as being, this should help the flow of information now that we have our own separate studio. But the net result of that in the last few months has been, Dark Horse seems like they've never been messier or more disorganized than they are right now. It's been like nearly 6 months at this point without a proper Avatar Studios update, and so on. Oh, that actually reminds me, there is one more thing that I saw that I wanted to talk about. It's this. I don't know if you guys saw this, because it's not really Avatar related, but there's an Avatar mention in this. So Viacom CBS CEO Bob Bakish, who is ultimately related to Avatar Studios, because Viacom CBS, Paramount Plus, he's talking about SpongeBob stuff, and all this stuff that relates to Nickelodeon, Viacom, and so on. We get to one of these questions mentions Avatar. Where is it? Yeah, here. I reported a story last year about how Bakish's strategy was to license to third-party outlets in a bid to expose content to bigger audiences before ultimately taking it back as an exclusive. Is that your strategy as well? That's been my strategy from the start. There's two great examples of that. Avatar The Last Airbender was a series that ran for 3 seasons on Nickelodeon and was never a huge show. Really? Like, I'm just going to let that sit there for a while. Like, chat, like, react to this statement from... who's actually being interviewed here? Because they're referencing... this is... what's his name? Robbins... Yeah, Brian Robbins. Yeah, I think he was the one who gave the update like about a month at the Nick Upfront thing. So yeah, Brian Robbins is involved in this. But yeah, like, what? That's just like crazy to me. Where's it gone? Yeah. And look. Never a huge show, but had an amazing following. We licensed that show to Netflix and it exploded, which it did. Then we put this spin-off on Paramount Plus and it crushed it. That led to our new relationship and bringing creators of Avatar back to Nickelodeon to form Avatar Studios. We are now on our way to full-fledged franchise strategy, creating films and spin-offs of Avatar. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And I guess from the hashtag big business perspective, you could say that this was true because, yeah, when ATLA came to an end in 2008, what happened? Yes, there was the attempt with the movie, but that was like a year or two afterwards. It wasn't immediately set up afterwards to come out like the year after. It took a little bit more time. And then there's a bit of a gap, and then Korra came back. And then, like, it's fair to say that in the context of this, like, huge success, Korra was popular, but didn't really sort of move the needle as much as Avatar did. Partly because of how they marketed it, partly because of how they treated it, of course. And if they did that better, it would have been, received and would have been more popular, of course. And again, like I was talking about with the merchandise earlier on, ATLA from a merchandise point of view, they went all in at the start on everything. It didn't do as well because they didn't give time for the franchise to grow. Then when it had finally grown, all the merchandise they'd stopped doing. In the sense that, like, they cancelled the toy line right as they were about to do the wave that had, like, the first female character, the first Katara figure. They stopped doing that. And so that's why, that Katara statue I did earlier in the week, that's why it's like the first ever piece of like kind of book 3 Katara merchandise. It's why this like Diamond Select Katara is like the first Katara action figure. It's why we can say kind of weird things like that about the franchise, is because it was mismanaged from a few perspectives early on. And then you have all those weird stories from like the gap of like just as Avatar came to an end, the movie happening, and into Korra, of like The Search was originally meant to be like a movie that they wanted to do with Nick, but then it just never happened. And there's been like weird statements about just like the nature of what exactly happened there and why it didn't happen. But it speaks to the idea of like, if they viewed it as being as big of a success as we all view it, they would have done the follow-up like immediately, in the sense of, where's my mother? it's a clear setup for something to come, but it didn't happen until like 5 years later in the comic. So there's all that sort of stuff. But it speaks to the idea of what we all saw, like I covered it in the news and stuff like that. The reason we went into that Paramount Plus event at all thinking and believing that something could happen was because of how popular the return to ATLA and Korra on Netflix was. Like, I think I've said it before, but my channel had a massive, and I mean massive for my channel, bump in like viewership and just everything stats wise on my channel, to the point where like a lot of the recent news, like even the Avatar Studios announcement, didn't lead to a bump like anywhere near as big as just Avatar's back on Netflix. This massive amount of people are now watching the videos that I have up that weren't watching them before and haven't watched them since, I suppose. So I have sort of just stats on my own channel that can show me this information as well. So that's kind of interesting. This is a bit of a weird one in that like spin-off on Paramount Plus and crushed it, and that like I thought that they only announced Paramount Plus and then it only launched like after they announced Avatar Studios. But they had something before this, didn't they? They had some platform where they had shows on it before, and I guess Korra was on it. And I think that's what they're talking about. But they're of course using Paramount Plus branding at the moment. But it was something else before, I think. But still, it's an interesting one. And then they talk about iCarly as like another one as well. But CBS All Access. Yeah, that's what it was. So I guess that's what they're talking about, the previous form of Paramount Plus. So that's fine. And so look, they say it here in the article. They're, of course, Avatar and iCarly are going to be taken off Netflix because Paramount Plus is what they want to do. 100%. Like that, to me, that was barely even news, because it was really obvious that with the licensing and the way it was going to work is that, yeah, of course they're going to leave Netflix eventually, because they now know, wait, people like Avatar, they like having Avatar on Netflix. Now let it known that there are shows, and if you subscribe here you'll get access to those two that you already like and all this other stuff that we're going to be making going forward. So that's their business strategy, basically, like, because they've just in the last few months, of course, launched Paramount Plus. They're building up the interest in their stuff. So there's that. So yeah, like a lot of interesting stuff to consider for sure with all of these pieces of information. But it is interesting that at the moment we are getting more information from the big business people, the franchise strategy guys, Nickelodeon president and CEO Brian Robbins. We're getting these people talking about it, and yet the people who are almost the most like secretive and coy about it are actually Mike and Brian, which is kind of interesting. But they need to say something sooner rather than later. Looks like we're not getting anything at San Diego Comic-Con, but I feel like they almost have to say something now at New York Comic-Con, whatever way it happens, or this Comic-Con special edition that they're doing, that I don't really know what exactly it is, but that's the other thing that is coming up. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I want to talk about here. Obviously at the moment this is sort of the most hype thing that's going on at the moment. I suppose, yeah, the chat there, the live action show. The problem with the live action show, and the reason I haven't really covered any of the updates on it, is because I find basically all of the updates that we're getting on the live action show to basically be the exact same over and over again. That because the live action show is just like a retelling, like it's the same content in a different medium, it's literally just like casting is happening. Great. And it's like, okay, the date they're starting filming has changed. Fine. Like, that's my reaction to a lot of that news. Like, it seems like kind of interesting and so on, but, you know, there's been no real rumors about, like, who they are casting. It's just happening in the background. And so, to me, it's a case of, until they announce who the actors are, that's something to talk about. Until they actually say, like, we're on set here are the actors in their costumes, and show that sort of stuff off. That's the only real stuff I'm kind of actually interested in talking about with that show, because the content is just a retelling. So I just want to know what's different and see some of the visuals. A lot of the technical details, scheduling details of the live action show don't particularly matter to me, because it's like, okay, cool, they're filming this episode, which is referencing this episode of the show. That's fine. Whereas I think everything about Avatar Studios is kind of interesting in terms of, tell me when schedule-wise you're starting this or that with Avatar Studios, and that's interesting. You know, when they're picking their production companies and animation studios, that's interesting, because obviously Studio Mirror are like announcing shows all over the place for a bunch of different franchises, and like, it doesn't feel like Avatar has a spot to fit in if Studio Mirror is going to be doing anything. So what animation studio will we be using for the movie, the shows? Will we need multiple animation studios? Are they making their own animation studio? There's a lot of stuff like that like kind of is to me interesting with Avatar Studios. But personally, I don't find myself particularly interested in, like, you know, like a lot of that stuff that's been coming out about, like, insiders are saying this and this about the behind the scenes of the live action show, especially because it so far has been the one where there's been the most sort of rumors that are clearly not true are coming out about, with like these like fake character descriptions and so on, the fake stuff about like, oh, Katara is going to be the older sister and stuff like that. And that's kind of weird, where already I'm not particularly interested, and then it's the thing that has all the sort of kind of controversial rumor information coming out about. It's just kind of hard to know what to cover, what not to cover. So that's why, like I said, kind of from the start, from the second the live action show was announced, I'll cover it as news, but don't expect me to cover it as much as I cover like anything else. So back when it was first announced, I was like, I'm going to cover the comics more than this, the books more than this. Now, of course, I'm going to cover Avatar Studios more than I cover the live action show. I just find everything else so much more interesting. Like I said before, to me right now, the live action show is just this bonus project that could be interesting, could be a train wreck, but doesn't really matter. It doesn't really impact anything anymore, because I have what I wanted, and that's all I really sort of care about at this point. Avatar merchandise stuff is going well. We're getting games, action figures, potentially, I suppose, maybe video games going forward. We're getting new shows. The comics and books will get going again. I don't really need a live action adaptation, and that's pretty much been my perspective from the start, even before we had all the super hype for everything. So I think that's probably like a decent place to sort of end the stream here. So I guess thanks everyone for kind of coming out to watch it and join me in our look through the quick start guide. I suppose we'll have another video coming up in the next few weeks when we sort of, you know, roughly do the same, kind of going through the Kickstarter to see what extra information they have and go over like which is the best option to get and so on. That's going to be pretty exciting, as well as, like I said, Suki Alone spoiler review is going to be coming out the day the book comes out. Me and Greg will try and organize a podcast as well for that week and so on. you know, there'll be content coming out because there's a book coming out, a big book coming out in the next kind of couple of days, and I think people are going to be excited by that. So yeah, that's been the stream. Thanks for watching, everyone, and bye.